Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor fans? Welcome to Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Monday, November 18th, and Grayson and I are coming to you after Baylor's fourth straight football victory. After the Bears got their first ever victory in Morgantown over West Virginia. Final score 49-35, and Grayson, you called it that it was going to be a double or a two-score victory for Baylor. Now, off on the score a little bit, but I give you credit that Baylor really, truthfully controlled that game. Outside of West Virginia getting up early, they got up and it was back and forth, but you felt good about where Baylor was because the offense specifically, and then the defense finally settled in. But man, bowl eligibility, that's the storyline here. We could talk about the win in West Virginia. We could talk about another win for Coach Aranda and all the news that came out after the game about Baylor retaining him, which was broke over on Sikkim 365. But that was, I think, once they got to bowl eligibility, that was the expectation. He's going to be retained at that point. It's official now. But getting to bowl eligibility for the season, 2 more games to go, the way that they won, really that second half was just pretty much dominated by Baylor, both sides of the ball, which was really encouraging to see after the way they started in that game, specifically on defense. But I think that you leave that game feeling pretty encouraged about the last 2 and the way they match up, especially playing the last game at home against Kansas, who is playing really, really good football right now.
Right. If anyone follows, what we do on Sikkim 365, we'd been talking about Dave Aranda being retained at 6 wins. Like, they make a bowl game, he's going to be retained. And I'm happy that was kind of announced, in whatever capacity it was. I think it's I think it's a big deal. And I don't think people quite view it that way. Like, we had a lot of mixed reaction on our site just about, the timing of it all. And I'm just like, man, signing day's coming up in 2 weeks. Like, this is important. And so I think people kind of forget about the timing of everything. So I think that was huge news. That's going to be a little underrated, but I think in the big picture, it's going to pay huge dividends as you kind of get to the end of this season and try to, continue to build on what is already a really good recruiting class at the moment. So as far as this game goes, again, I'd love to see Baylor put together 4 complete quarters of football. Yeah, they still did not do that when it comes to both sides of the ball, right? The offense was just unbelievable in the first half. It literally looked like an Art Briles offense. It was just, during that time period where it was just touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. If the other team couldn't score, it was like, all right, now you're up by 14, just able to build on leads. And, luckily for West Virginia, the Baylor defense just didn't play well in the first half, and West Virginia took advantage of that. Garrett Green, a lot of rushing yards. I think he had 100 rushing yards at halftime. Just was moving the chains consistently. They hit on a couple explosive plays, and it really allowed them to stay in the game. They got the touchdown that I don't even know if it was a touchdown at the very end there, but still another big play. Yeah, another big play for them. And in general, the first half felt very much like 2012. And then obviously the second half, a lot of things changed. So great effort by Baylor to get to bowl eligibility is absolutely massive. It's huge for this program. You get all that time of practice added, and you just get this opportunity to build more momentum, going into the end of this season and of course next season.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've really kind of taken note of is that in these 4 games, this is another double-digit victory for Baylor over Big 12 teams. And I haven't looked back to see how far that goes back, but 3 of the 4 games winning by at least 10 points. At least since the 20, I guess you could probably say maybe it happened in 21, but I don't really remember it being that significant. 3 of 4. Just Baylor in these games where they're playing pretty well. But it's a stretch where, if this is mixed in any other season where they were winning, they were expected to win, everybody would be talking about how well this team is really playing. And I want to say on both sides of the ball, but the defense right now is doing enough. And I think that's what they're strong in some facets of the game, and then they have weaknesses. And one thing I think really kept this game closer wasn't necessarily what the defense was not capable of doing. It was the penalties that extended drives. And we've talked about that a lot this season. Some of them I didn't agree with, but then some of them I did. And you kind of take those hand in hand. But I thought the defense, there's two things to it, the penalties, but then the offense, they were moving the ball so quickly. They didn't have a drive in the first half that was over 2.5 minutes. They had 10 or 11 minutes of time of possession in the first half. And at the end of the half, when they went with the onside kick, I think Dave Aranda just said, look, West Virginia is probably going to score from wherever we give them the ball in this juncture. And I think that he was just kind of conceding to his defense. And truthfully, if I think it was Devin Lemire on the if he just stays in his lane, it's probably a recovered onside kick. But all that, I think he was just saying, hey, my defense is gassed. And then they went in, made adjustments, and Baylor ran the ball down West Virginia's throat in the second half and took control of the game. West Virginia couldn't stop it. And that's been kind of the strength of their defense, is stopping the run. In the second half, they were not able to stop the run against Baylor. Bryson Washington, the running game just completely gets going. Baylor flips the script and has basically 20 minutes of time of possession in that second half, and they win it by 2 scores. Really 3 scores. I mean, you got the score late, but I think that second half really showed an identity of what this team can be if they can get and have a lead against a decent West Virginia front seven.
Yeah, I agree. I think the onside kick, it actually ended up kind of working. It didn't work the way that they wanted it to, but in general, West Virginia scored quickly and gave Baylor the ball back. And Baylor goes down the field, and unfortunately, they scored too quickly.
Yeah.
And so then West Virginia is able to score. But if you think about it, okay, we need 2 minutes on the clock and 3 timeouts, and we're going to feel really good about driving down the field. Well, the problem is Baylor did in about, a minute 13. They did it really quick. 52 seconds actually is how long that drive took. So you would have liked to have seen them waste more time and then go up by 14 points. But as we know, that's not really the way this offense operates. So they went down, scored, and West Virginia answered in a really tough drive to explain, to be honest. They gave up a touchdown in 47 seconds right before halftime. And it really, I think it was that big explosive play on Caden Jenkins down the, I guess it was kind of a corner route. Oh, Colt, you're muted.
Oh, my bad, guys. Yeah, so I think it was a pretty good play by West Virginia's offense. By the passing game. And then I believe there was an interference or an offsides or something that extended the drive as well. So, and that was on a 3rd and 17 that went for 44 yards, which was the tough part about it. So
after a Jackie Marshall sack.
Yeah. To put it in 3rd and 17. Yeah, that was that. You're right, though, in that, you get it. Even if you get the onside kick, if you don't get the onside kick, you get the ball back. You say, we're going to get the ball one more time in what it might be with a minute left. It might be with 30 seconds, or whatever it is. They do get the ball back. And if you just if the defense can hold, and they didn't, and that was tough. And there's a lot of things that went against them. But yeah, that was the play that made that game closer in the second half than it really was.
It was. It really, really was. And so, but just to be clear here, we can talk about how bad the defense was. They struggled. I mean, 28 points and a half. That's not good. And that last drive really, 47 seconds, you're giving up a touchdown. That's a little ridiculous that's happening and can't be commonplace. But in this game, it certainly was. But then on the flip side, the offense was just insane. I mean, Sora Robertson was throwing it all over the field. I think he had 260 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first half. I mean, he was just throwing it all over the place. And Bryson Washington was continuing to make plays, had that great touchdown reception in the first half. And they just really were and this is what we talked about coming in. I think this was the important part of it. Baylor was going to do whatever they wanted to do offensively. And I thought that was going to lead to 31 plus points, and it ended up being 49 points. So it went above and beyond what I thought it was going to do in this game, but it was the reason why I thought Baylor would win this game, because I didn't think West Virginia could keep up. And then the first half, West Virginia kept up. So it's kind of oh man. But then the second half, of course, things flip. But I got to give huge credit to Jake Spavital. This whole offensive performance in the first half, throwing the football, was absolutely elite. And then the adjustments they made going into the second half, where they really took advantage of that West Virginia run defense that I thought was a little bit more shaky than the stats said. And Baylor took advantage of it. And they found rushing lanes. They avoided tackles. Dawson Pendergrass and Bryson Washington both really ran well and ran hard and were able to get some extra yards even on top of what the offensive line was giving them.
Yeah. So you look at the rushing game specifically, and Baylor actually in the third quarter had 10 carries for 14 yards. I don't know if there's a sack mix in there, but then you go into the fourth quarter and Baylor ended up with 12 carries for 74 yards. And really, they had a pretty good second quarter rushing the football as well. Mm-hmm. It was just all mixed in. One of the long runs by Bryson Washington was 51 yards added to that. But then the second half, it was really just Baylor took control with the run game. The offensive line did really well. And I want to start with the offensive line. 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss given up. And this is another game. And right now, I think Baylor's number 1 in Big 12 play in tackles for loss allowed. And that's just incredible. They're giving up 3.5 tackles for loss per game in Big 12 play. Last year, that number was over 7 in Big 12 play. That is remarkable. And you could say you're not happy. You're not fully impressed by the offensive line because they're in this scheme are doing exactly what they need to do. And now you've played you played West Virginia, you played TCU who has an athletic front seven. They're not a great front seven, but they're athletic. Like they're handling everything that's being thrown at them well. Now, Houston and Kansas are both very disruptive by comparison to some of the teams they've played. But I think you feel good going into those matchups based on what this offense is doing. But overall, offensive line, very impressive. I mean, they gave Sawyer time. He didn't really need a lot of time, a lot of quick passing game early. It was like they spread him out horizontal, and then you saw the long run by Bryson Washington in the first half that really kind of countered those horizontal passes. And I was really impressed with the screen game that they started with because we haven't seen a ton of that. And that was kind of the wrinkle. They've done it some, but not to the consistency that they did in that first half against West Virginia. Sawyer got the ball out on time. Blocking was great. And it just kind of made West Virginia decide, what are you going to do now? They spread horizontal, went vertical with running game, went vertical with pass, obviously with the deep shots, and it worked out well.
You know, and this was such an interesting thing going into this game, and it's unique for what Spavital has done so far this year, and I'm sure you caught it as well, but during this run and really during all year, Baylor has taken a lot of shots down the sideline. That's been a staple of the offense, sideline shots, run the ball, some screens, take shots down the sideline. They hardly took any shots down the sideline in this game. Everything was screen or over the middle of the field. They really attacked the middle of the field in this game. It was so impressive. And those throws are really difficult for a quarterback. And Sawyer was making them consistently. They were very accurate. They were on time. And the problem is for teams going forward, you mentioned Houston and Kansas. It's like, well, they knew Baylor was capable of taking one-on-one shots on the outside, but now you have to game plan for what they're going to be able to do across the middle of the field. And then you're able to, send a guy like Monterey Baldwin on a deep route from the slot and take advantage of it. Very similar to what he did against Colorado in that game as well. That same type of look. And Sawyer Robertson hit him. Then you got Bryson Washington running basically a go route down the middle of the field and catching a touchdown.
That was an incredible play too.
Incredible. It was pass interference as well, and no flag was thrown. Shocked.
Don't get me started. I literally do not know what pass interference is anymore, because you can have 2 different plays, the exact same play. I mean, almost identical plays. One's a flag and one's not. And it's been like that all season. It's not just about this game. I don't really know what it is anymore. And I don't know if it's ever going to be addressed, but that's an aside. I don't want to get on a tangent about pass interference, but it was. Yeah, that play was incredible. Bryson for a running back. I don't know if he knew that ball was thrown until the last minute in the way he went up and got it. It was
Sawyer double clutched. I mean, he clutched one time and then threw it, and somehow he still threw pretty much the perfect ball while double clutching. It was really, really impressive to see him do that. I mean, he just diced up this West Virginia secondary, and we knew this coming in. And once again, I'll say it again. You are not in the top 6 in QBR in the entire nation unless you can really play and really go. I mean, when you're in the list with the guys that he's in the list with Dylan Gabriel, Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, like you can flat out play. And I think going into this game, that's kind of what I expected. And I felt like there were a lot of West Virginia fans and people that I talked to that were kind of questioning whether Baylor could fully take advantage of West Virginia's secondary because Sawyer hasn't had these 400-yard passing games. But the problem is what he has been doing is efficiently moving the ball down the field. And so the problem is he's sitting here 26 of 36, which is even a little skewed because he was better than that for most of the game, accuracy-wise. 329 yards and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, taking care of the football, playing reliable football, really only threw, in my eyes, one ball that could have been turned over, the one down the sideline. He just played very efficient football and guided this team down the field. And then, once he did his damage in the first half, West Virginia tried to figure some things out in their secondary, and then Baylor just ran it right at him for, the 2 quarters in the second half. Very impressive stuff.
Yeah, and finished with an 86 QBR. He's still 6th in the country in QBR after yesterday's games. And I think the most impressive thing about that was they didn't have to use his legs. He was sacked the one time, had one other carry, but for 2 attempts, they didn't need him to do that. And I think if you're an opponent now and Baylor's not having to rely on his legs, what do you do? I mean, like you can't just say, okay, we're going to take everything away, because at this juncture, this offense can run without using his legs. They just proved it. And they've shown it pretty consistently, but now you truly had a full game plan where he didn't have to scramble. He had 1 run and 1 sack. And you go, if you're Houston or you're Kansas, I don't know, there's only 2 games left, but like that is not something that Baylor's having to bank on for their offense to be efficient, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because before you might say, okay, Sawyer might have to break down. You go and look at the beginning of this year. The expectation was Baylor needs DeQuan Finn to use his legs to make this offense go. Well, here we are in game 10 of the season. Sawyer Robertson is your quarterback, and he only has to have 2 carries for you to score 49 points. That's impressive. And I don't think that was anything that we would have ever expected coming into this year. And truly, like I hadn't really thought about it, but I don't even know that I would have expected it in this game. I thought they were going to probably need to use him a little bit more in the run game based on what West Virginia's done. They didn't have to. I mean, Dawson Pendergrass, Bryson Washington, 91 yards between the two. Then you had your negative yards, but that's impressive from your 2 running backs. Dawson having the kind of game clinching drive or kind of put it on ice late. And I was just impressed with the offense not needing Sawyer's legs in this game.
I was as well. I just want to hit on a couple things that you said there. This is what Baylor has done against bad defenses, and that this is just the way that it is. And that should be the expectation going forward. The problem is the next 2 teams they play do not have defenses that I would put in the same category as the 4 teams that they just played. We'll dive deeper on that later this week. We'll see kind of where they line up as far as analytics go. But when Baylor's played a bad defense, they have absolutely feasted all year long. And now we're seeing this run game run on one of the better run defenses in the Big 12. And so I think we're almost getting to a point where this offense is probably going to operate very efficiently against just about anyone. Yeah. And if that is the case, then they're probably going to run the ball against just about anyone they face as well. And if you do load up to try to take that away, you're probably going to be giving up something in the secondary in which Baylor can take advantage of that as well. I've tweeted this during the game. The offensive line, I mean, like Sawyer has been amazing, and I think we've given Sawyer enough credit. Like Sawyer's awesome. I think we've seen that he's the future of this program the rest of the season and next year in his final year. He's changed a whole lot of things with their passing game and done a lot, but the offensive line has just completely changed the narrative of this offense and of Baylor's season. I mean, period. And coming into the year, we talked about this a lot. If Baylor got, right around Big 12 average in offensive line play, that's what I felt like they had to get to in order to make a bowl game, around average. And I would say at this point, I think they're one of the top 5 offensive lines in the Big 12. And it's crazy that has shifted so much from the beginning of the year where they're struggling to run the football, don't look cohesive at all, giving up sacks. And that led all the way into the bye week. They had troubles all the way until then. And since that point, They haven't given up a single game with more than 2 sacks in a game. I think multiple of these games during this stretch have only been 1 sack. They're not giving up tackles for loss. They're running all over people. I mean, they had 285 yards on average the first 3 games of this run, and then 183 in this game. So what? They're roughly around like 240 yards rushing during this run right now. It's so impressive. They're keeping Sawyer clean, and they're really giving Baylor a chance to score a lot of points and have a very efficient offense. And that's credit to Jake Spavital. That's also a lot of credit to Mason Miller, the guys that they brought in, putting in Sidney Fugar at left tackle. All of those things have kind of really come together to make this unit one of the better ones in the Big 12.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, if you just look at it, the entire statistical group, from scoring offense down to tackles for loss per game. Scoring offense is number 2 in the Big 12 and Big 12 play only, and that includes the Utah game where they struggled so much. That was with Daquan Finn. So that number actually includes that. Not it's league play, but it's league teams is the way that CFB stats pull. So it does show the Utah game. So take that with a grain of salt, understanding like these numbers also include a Utah team that Baylor faced early in the year where they were completely 2 different teams. But tackles for loss ranked number 1 in allowed per game. So I'm really anxious to see these last 2 weeks, but I think they go into these games. I don't want to say like relax. I don't think that's the best word, but I think that the pressure's now even off. I think you go into these games at Houston and at home versus Kansas, where it's kind of like you're playing with house money at this point. There's no additional added pressure of the season pressure, I guess is the way to put it. It's like, let's just go out and play. And they've exceeded expectations. And I want to segue into the defensive side of the ball by saying this. The way that Baylor attacked the transfer portal last year, they brought in guys on the defensive side of the ball, but the majority of the emphasis was on the offensive side of the ball. You look strictly, I mean, there were some guys on the defensive side of the ball, but it's more like plug, like, hey, there's going to be like 3 or 4 guys that we bring in that we need to do something. On offense, they brought in guy after guy saying we need to revamp the offense. And that's what they did. I mean, you start with Ashton Hawkins. You start on how many offensive linemen did they bring in? Talk about Michael Trigg. You bring in Daquan Finn, who doesn't pan out. Even like Jamal Bell, who was brought in as a receiver. He was brought in as a depth guy on the offensive side of the ball. Like they needed these numbers, and they got them. And that side of the ball has taken off. On the defensive side of the ball, I don't think they spend as much resources as they did on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that's where you're kind of seeing this difference of the defense not necessarily having all of the playmakers, all of the revamp that they needed. You talk about a cornerback in Lorando Johnson. You talk about Keaton Thomas, who is JUCO, and then Steve Linton and Linus Noel. Those are kind of your 4 transfers at this junction that are playing a lot. And that's only 4 guys versus compared to the offense. So all that's to say is, look on the defensive side of the ball. We know what happened in the first half. I think if you were frustrated with the first half, I think you have to be just as encouraged by the second half. You talk about going in this game. I mentioned turnovers. I said they need to get 1 turnover where they actually get a turnover, and they need to get at least 1 4th down stop. They had 3 4th down stops before West Virginia converted 1. And that I guess it might have been the last drive or sometime late in the game. Yeah, those were massive, and those were just good plays. They had the right calls in the right spots, and they made plays on those 4th downs. And you talk about the interception was great, but they're still making plays. It's just not all there. It's like there's still these holes in the defense, but then in the second half they played well, and I was encouraged by it. Like I think you have to be encouraged by the adjustments. These guys are still playing hard. Dave Aranda's obviously still making working hard for that defense, and I think they still have holes, but I think it's showing life. And for that bouncing off that offense, like just get a few stops, do a few things. This offense is going to score. And it's kind of reminiscing of, the early Art Briles years where you're just get enough stops and let our offense work. I felt that way a lot on Saturday against West Virginia.
There's a lot to unpack by what you just said, because I agree very much with you. Like you look at the defense and they relied a lot on development. And I think that in large part, that's a good idea, but you have to supplement it with some guys who have been more proven. And I think you're seeing it. Like, I mean, who's this defense's best players? Like, I think if you name 10 guys, probably, or if you name their top 8 defense players, 4 or 5 of them are probably transfers.
Mm-hmm.
I think the guys
bring in a ton. That's what's the crazy part. They didn't bring
Right.
anything, but those are the impact guys. Yeah.
They are. I mean, aside from Jackie Marshall, Matt Jones, and I mean, I get
Carl
Trevin.
Williams. Trevin had
Trevin,
another
but
good
he
start.
was
Yeah.
a transfer at one
Yeah.
time.
He was a second year. He's a second year transfer.
Yeah, Carl's been. I don't even know if I can put Carl in there. Carl's had an up and down year. He's been hurt a lot
Yeah.
this year, and Caden Jenkins has had his moments, but he's also struggled at times and been hurt. So, but you look at across the defense. I mean, Steve Linton, that guy is playing awesome football. Lorando Johnson probably just had his best game.
Yeah, if Linton would stop jumping off sides, he would be having much. I mean, he's playing aggressive. But go ahead. Yeah, I mean, Lorando had 5 pass breakups in that game, which were massive. Plus some interferences. I think 1 or 2 interferences, which again, I don't know where we're going with interferences, but he played well, to your point.
He played really well. And then of course, Keaton Thomas, really good player, continues to be an anchor for them. But that kind of next wave is just, going into this offseason, I do think the defense I think both sides are going to be a focal point, and they have to be. There's a lot of guys leaving. And so you have to find a way to supplement that. And I also think this was a great opportunity for Baylor to evaluate the guys they have on the roster. You got 2 games left and then a bowl game and all those bowl practices. Like, it's time for guys to start showing, are you going to be an impact player going into next year? Because if you're not showing that, then, Baylor's got to figure out a way to get better at various positions. And this is not a complete defense yet. So they need to take that step towards that, but it's probably going to be an off-season type thing. Like, I think they'll have moments this year, but I do think in order to correct everything, it's going to take an off season. And so they're better than they were a year ago. I full-heartedly believe that. I think that their offense scores a lot more and a lot quicker. And so it puts them in tougher situations. But here's the deal, man. Dave Aranda dialed it up for a lot of this game. Like, I know West Virginia ends up scoring 28 points in the first half, but Devin Bobby should have had an interception in the end zone, and he was put in a position to have that interception. They created pressure. That has to be picked off. Like that, it's thrown right to you, hits 2 hands. Like, you got to make that play. And then you go to the second half, and it's like, hey, man, like Matt Jones getting dropped into coverage instead of blitzing led to the pass breakup that he had on 4th down. Dave Aranda's call to blitz Matt Jones on the other 4th down led to an error throw that made them short. Like, Dave Aranda coached a heck of a game in the second half. And I would say the first half, couple plays, if guys make a couple plays, it probably looks a lot different on the scoreboard. I understand 35 points is 35 points, but for him to have this defense so ready in the second half after giving up 28 points, and let's be honest, it took Baylor's offense some time in the second half. So you really had to play kind of complementary football where the offense was going great. Then they struggled for a little bit, and Baylor got stop after stop after stop until the offense kind of got their footing again. I felt like that was very, very impressive in the second half and almost led to a shutout.
Yeah. And I think we've seen that a few times in the second half in games. We talk about the Tech game, the way that Baylor rebounded and played in that game. We talk about the BYU game. And then even going back to the Colorado game, that was a game until that Hail Mary late that they had held Colorado to 7 second half points. Give up a Hail Mary, then give up the 7 points in overtime.
Utah as well, which we understand the situation with Cam Rising going out, but they shut him out. And like, we've seen that several times. Now it's like, okay, just do it for a full game. And I'll go back to the penalty scene. Like, I felt like there were so many penalties in that first half that just extended drives that really hurt. And I don't want to, like, I felt like Baylor offensively ran a lot more tempo, which led to 10 minutes of time of possession in the first half. It's remarkable to me to score 35 points when you have the ball for 10 minutes. I don't know, like, that's an insane number. And I'm really, I think that hurts Baylor's defense to an extent. I think especially when it comes to points late in the game, you played a lot of snaps. West Virginia ran 89, I believe it was 89 offensive plays in that game. That's a lot of plays for and you saw late in that game, the players that Baylor had on the defense side of the ball, a lot of guys were getting reps. And I know they wanted to keep them from scoring late. I think I was a little bit upset that they let that. And I know Dave Aranda mentioned it. But it was like another garbage time point. You talk about 20 or 14 against Tech that were late. That didn't mean anything. Now 7 in this game. And you're looking at points per game. That's
you've played 7 Big 12 games now. That's 3 points on your average. And that's that's not the end of the world by any means, but it does. It takes away from the improvement that they have had. Dave Aranda mentioned in his press conference too, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to it. He said this isn't a thing that's going to be fixed overnight. And I think he was directly referring to the ability to have players on his roster. And not that I think it's just focusing and adding guys and developing guys. I think there's multiple layers to that, but he said it can't be fixed in the offseason. I mean, it can't be fixed in the middle of the season. And that was what we heard last year. And there were things that they fixed last offseason that has improved this year. Talk about third down defense. Baylor right now, third down defense is number 3 in the Big 12 in Big 12 play. That's a great indicator compared to where they were last year. I think Baylor's dead last, over 50% in third down defense last year. Sacks, number 3 at 2.5 sacks per game. Tackles for loss, number 3 at 6.38. Those are 3 indicators of where this defense has potential and is getting better. But then you talk about fourth down defense. They've struggled. They're number 14. Red zone touchdown percentage is still low. Obviously, scoring is 14th. I think it's a little concerning. I mean, a little kind of deceiving the way that they get up some points in these games. And then like passing efficiency, we know that story. But, I think that they're playing well. And I want to hit on some of these things in these games. I mentioned the fourth down stops, which were, flip that game. I mean, truly, like getting those stops in those moments allow Baylor's offense back on the field. 4 sacks was the most Garrett Green has ever been sacked in his career. It's gotten to 3, but it's never been to 4. And he's so elusive that number is very impressive. 8 tackles for loss. And then they obviously got the interception, but Garrett Green was only 19 of 39 passing. And for what Baylor's deep, like they forced him into tough throws a lot of times. He missed some throws, but it was because Baylor forced him into those. That was a really impressive number, 47% completions for him. Even though it was his first game back, like they did what they had to do. They just couldn't stop the run, but I was okay with the way the secondary played outside of the interference calls. That was the kind of the breaking point. It's kind of like played better, but that's still really frustrating to get that many interference calls.
Yeah, it allowed them to continue drives and get down the field and continue scoring points. And Garrett Green's running ability was also insane how much they had this guy running around out there after just being hurt. And then also for Neil Brown to sit there and complain about his quarterback with that hit that was not a targeting hit by Caleb Parker. But for him to be mad about that and then turn right around and run his quarterback 22 times, that's so hypocritical that you're going to look for calls when you're out there putting your quarterback in danger, asking him to run around. And I felt like at times Garrett Green had opportunities to run more. And I think he was just like, I'm not trying to get hit anymore. Know, there were a couple times where it's like, but there were a couple where he decided to throw the football and he's thrown it into the stands instead of running for 10, 15 yards. Baylor just had no answer in the first half for his running ability. It got so much better in the second half, but that first half really showed some of the cracks. And we mentioned this going to these next 2 games. I mean, you're about to face 2 really good running quarterbacks, especially Jalen Daniels at the end of the year. So they're going to have to get that corrected, but at least they kind of got a first glimpse of it. Because they really haven't had to deal with a guy that could run like Garrett Green could, and they struggled with it.
Yeah, and he's a different animal running the football too. Like he's elusive, but his top end, his acceleration to top end is different. And I know Jalen Daniels can do it a little bit, but I don't think anybody compares to Green's ability to get out and to put that 22 carries into perspective. His next highest in his career were 17 attempts. I was against Kansas earlier this year, but before that Kansas game, he had never been over 16 attempts, and he went for 22 carries for 129. So, like, you look at his last 4 games. You talk about Baylor at 5.9 yards per rush, but Kansas State 8.1, Iowa State 8.7, Oklahoma State 8.6. Those were on 10, 10, and 11 carries, and he basically did 22. I mean, that was 3 games basically worth of rushing attempts for him in this game against Baylor. And I was really shocked. I did not expect them to come in and run him that much, and it gave Baylor trouble. And I almost wonder if Baylor just didn't expect him to be utilized that way in this game. And it would kind of change their game plan up in a little bit in the second half to affect it. But and I don't know what the exact numbers were total wise, but you mentioned him rushing for basically 100 yards in the first half. West Virginia's rushing game in the second half was just almost non-existent. And that was really encouraging. That was kind of the difference between Baylor's defense in the first and second half, was just the ability to eliminate the rushing game. And maybe they just committed more guys to the box. I haven't watched the film yet, but they did a much better job controlling that. And then obviously getting 4 sacks helps the numbers as well.
Yeah, they were spying Garrett Green a lot more in the second half too, or at least trying to. Baylor messed that up a couple times as well, with Steve Linton and Garmin Randolph, where they had opportunities to really put him back. They gave up some yards, but in general, I think Baylor was trying to do a lot more of that, and it worked. It definitely worked, and they were able to control the front a lot better in the second half. And I don't know what was going on during the week where West Virginia fans were saying that Nico Marchiol should be their starting quarterback going forward, because there is nothing I've seen from Nico Marchiol that was anywhere close to as dynamic as Garrett Green was in this game, especially in the first half. And West Virginia puts up 35 points on you. They're going to win a lot of games, just not against this Baylor offense. I mean, that was just kind of that was the consistent, right? The Baylor offense just kept moving it up and down the field. Really impressive performance. And of course, I do think that the second half, the defense isn't going to get a ton of credit, even though they should. I mean, again, you only gave up 7 points, and you were really very close to pitching a shutout there at the end of the game. And so I felt like they really kind of flipped the switch in the second half. Now we just continue to wait for the defense to play a full 4 quarters. Hopefully it happens going forward. They have their best opportunity for it actually this upcoming weekend to have their best defensive performance of the year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're going to get into Houston, obviously, but they're as bad as the defenses that Baylor has played over the last few weeks have been. Houston's on the opposite end of the spectrum, but it's on it's on the same end of the spectrum, but it's on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, they're like 16th, 15th, like every bottom third category offensively, that's where they are. But I wanted to talk about the West Virginia rush offense for a second. They rushed for 221 yards in the first half. They had 262 for the game. That's a stark contrast for Baylor's defense. Yep. And it was evident. It wasn't anything that West Virginia just changed their game plan. That was evident in the way Baylor's playing. They were just completely shutting down the run. And I was holding Jaheim White to 67 yards on 16 carries. I was really impressed with final numbers wise, because he's a guy that can get out and break long runs. And I don't know what his total numbers are for the year are right now, but obviously Garrett Green was the driving factor with 129 yards, but the second half to give up basically 40 yards rushing was really encouraging. And it tells me like it's the ability's there, but it's just put it all together. You mentioned it. Four quarters. And I don't know if it's going to come this year. I think Houston's the best chance. Kansas is going to be a challenge later in the year, in Waco to end the year on Senior Day. But the good news there is they give up. I mean, you mentioned their defense not being as bad, but they still give up a lot of explosive plays. BYU kind of had their way with them. They just couldn't score points. BYU couldn't. And so those are both very winnable games. And Baylor now sitting at 6-4, 4-3. There's like this small, slim path to the Big 12 championship game. It's like tons of dominoes have to fall. But the reality is there's still a path there. And that in and of itself is the talking point. It's like if Baylor's in that position, they have 2 winnable games. They're favored by 8 over Houston at this point. They'll probably be favored over Kansas. It'll be probably a 3-ish top point line right now, depending on where Kansas is after their game against Colorado. But the path is there to win 8 games. And I don't know what you predicted preseason. I thought Baylor would finish 6-6. Now I'm going to be disappointed with 6-6. Especially after these last 4 games, the way that they've played out, winning 3 of these games by double digits, you expect fully to go into these last 2 games and win them. And if you're not expecting to win those as a fan, I don't know what you're watching, because this team is capable of doing that. You get your easier opponent on the road, your tougher opponent at home, and it's going to be Senior Day when they play Kansas, which is the tougher of the 2 teams. I'm really anxious to see how the season finishes out. I think they have a lot of capabilities of doing it.
I agree. And yeah, I had them going 6-6 to start the year. And I agree with you, though. I mean, that would be extremely disappointing if they were able to, if they weren't able to get to at least 7 wins. That would be a problem. 7 wins in the regular season. You got to at least split these games. But truthfully, my expectation is they're going to beat Houston. And so then you go into the Kansas game and it's like senior night, last game in front of your home fans. It almost kind of feels like, you kind of need to win that game, to really cement things. But I mean, if they do that and they win 6 in a row going into a bowl game, I mean, that would be incredible. What an incredible finish that could be. And we talked about this early in the year. Like, I think it was during the bye week when, I wrote an article for Sikkim 365 talking about the past teams that rode this momentum at certain points during the season to get to bowl eligibility and compared it to the 2012 team. And I think there's so many signs that are so similar to that year. And they were blowing out teams at the end of the year as well. I mean, they blew out the number 1 team in the country badly. And so now you're seeing this Baylor team kind of taking a similar path. And if they can continue this momentum, win a few more games, maybe get to 8 wins, maybe win a bowl game and get to 9, I mean, they're going to be one of the favorites in the Big 12 going into next year.
Yeah. And we have seen how that can flip like that. You talk about Oklahoma State this year, all the returnings that they had.
Yep.
They have to be ready to attack the transfer portal. They have to be ready to develop guys in the spring. And they have to be smart. But I think what we've seen from this staff, if they can go in and have momentum going in, Dave Aranda's, the announcement came out that he's staying, which was to be expected after getting the postseason. But now it's not about 6 wins. Now it's about getting 8 wins, driving that into the transfer portal season. Early signing period now. We can't talk specifics about recruiting, but feel free to hop on Sikkim 365 where there's more information about it. But there's a lot of things to be excited about outside of just winning 6 games. Like there's momentum there that recruiting a really highly rated recruited class from high school ranks that's available. I think Baylor right now is at the number 2 recruiting class in the Big 12 and the kind of the composite rankings for the 2025 class. But they have the opportunity to build on all of that. You beat TCU, you beat Texas Tech, you beat Oklahoma State, you beat West Virginia. And now you got Houston, and now who is a rival recruiting wise now, being in the state of Texas and in the Big 12. And they can capitalize on this momentum and then go into the offseason, specifically in the portal of guys that you need to come in and make an immediate impact. That's the reality of college football now. So I'm really big 2 weeks here. Finish 8-4. And that's exceeding everyone's expectations. And that's really, I mean, that's a good sign for the program if you can do that.
And I tweeted about this and you asked me about it. I know about the stats, but going into this game, Baylor had the number 1 scoring offense in the nation and the number 1 yards per game offense in the entire nation. And I mean, I'll have to go back and look at it, but I can't imagine that anyone caught him after this game. We'll see. I know Notre Dame crushed Virginia, so maybe they'll have some competition there. But Baylor is rolling, and I'm telling y'all, we mentioned the transfer portal, we mentioned recruiting. If Baylor wins 8 games and Baylor continues to play offense like this, there's going to be a lot of guys that want to play in an offense like this that is about to lose 5 wide receivers off this roster. Like, there's a lot of opportunities here for Baylor to be as good or even better next year on the offensive side. And if you return Sawyer Robertson, return guys like Bryson Washington, basically return your entire offensive line outside of Campbell Barrington, who is very, very, playing very, very well. I mean, you got a great opportunity to keep this thing rolling and then attack the defensive side and try to fill in some gaps there as well and add some talent. It's very important. Also wanted to mention this because you mentioned this idea of like, I just have this idea in my head, if Baylor does finish strong this year and goes into next year as a favorite, I'm looking around at the favorites in the Big 12 this year, and there is a lot of issues.
You got to keep scrolling to the bottom of the 16. Yeah.
There's a lot of issues with complacency around the league. I mean, teams, I know Utah dealt with injuries, but Oklahoma State, Kansas State just got, double-digit loss to Arizona State at home. That's just who's the hungrier team right there. I mean, Kansas State losing to Houston as well. Iowa State has kind of floundered their opportunity to potentially make a Big 12 championship. It's very interesting. We'll talk about it more in the offseason. You have to avoid complacency, but I think for Baylor, it's more about gaining the momentum so that next year you feel like you are a team that can win the Big 12.
Yep. And we say that knowing there's still 2 games left, but I think that it just sets up so well. I mean, they're 8-point favorites now over Houston. They'll be a close line against Kansas. But we're understanding that anything can happen in the next 2 games. We could be talking a different story. But it's encouraging right now. So really, really exciting times. I mean, 4-game win streak. I don't remember the last time that's happened in Big 12 play. I mean, it hadn't been in the last, even in the and I'm talking regular season. They did it in 21, but that included Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. I would assume it was 2019 based on the start. But there's not been many times in the last 10 years that that's happened. So they've done it now this season. And I don't care who they've played. There's not a lot of teams in the Big 12 right now that are winning 4 games in a row in Big 12 play, especially 3 or 4 by double digits.
And against 3 bowl teams. West Virginia, we'll see, but I think they're going to make a bowl game. And then TCU and Tech are already bowl teams. So I find that kind of ridiculous when people are saying, oh, look at the schedule they've played. I mean, there's faced 3 bowl teams.
Yeah, there's a chance that I think TCU will be favored in their 2 final games to get to 8-4, which is not, as a Baylor fan, you don't want them to get 8-4, but they should. Texas Tech is depending on the West Virginia game, they could be an 8-win team. West Virginia could be a 7-win team, depending on the Tech game. So there's a lot of, potential. And then we've seen how well Kansas is playing right now. They beat Iowa State, they beat BYU over the weekend. Right. And they have Colorado, so they could come in and flying high. Even though they're just struggling to get back to a bowl game eligibility, they're playing well right now. And then Houston, we've seen they had a bad loss this weekend against Arizona, a game that you and I talked about. They had a chance. We thought they had a chance to win, but they're still fighting for bowl eligibility. So it's all there. The Big 12 is just a big mosh pit, man. It's insane. You hate that there's not that one undefeated team after BYU loses, and try to get 2 Big 12 teams in the playoff. But at this juncture, it's just kind of free for all. Baylor has to find a way to get back to the top of the conference. And right now they're 5th in the league in the standings. And you finish 6-3, you're talking the potential to finish in the top 4th of the league, the top, 1 to 4 range. And that would be incredibly impressive considering how the season started this year.
It definitely would. And I just think people need to remember this streak's huge. That this streak, winning 4 games is big, but the teams that they've beaten during this streak, beating TCU, beating Texas Tech, beating Oklahoma State. Those are 3 huge recruiting rivals. They're massive. Those are huge wins every year. I don't care that Oklahoma State's having a bad year. You still have to beat them. And Baylor did that. And so, there's a lot to that we'll get into this week. But Baylor making a bowl game, Dave Aranda coming back, the momentum, the positive vibes, the positive recruiting, the positive outlook of the offense, the defense making some strides, bouncing back in the second half. In general, this is just a Baylor team that continues to ride high with a lot of momentum and have 2 games left and an opportunity to win both.
Yeah, so stay tuned this week. A lot of previews of Houston and talk about the Big 12 and where everything stands. And but for this episode, that's all we got. And thank you for tuning in Inside Baylor Sports. Thanks, as always, for listening every single time to those of you who do. Have a great Monday and sick and Baylor.